All right, welcome to your scheduling module. This is the last module for the course before your final exam. Um, the purpose of this video is just to walk through the module so you understand what resources you're looking at, understanding what your assignment is, your discussion post, and where your quiz is. So you've already got past this. You guys can all read your module objectives. There are a few different introductory PowerPoints on scheduling, so just introductory stuff on scheduling. The first one is your network scheduling introduction. I'm just pulling this up here for you. It just shows you some basics about what network scheduling is, different types of schedules, CPM versus PDM versus PERT and bar and Gantt charts. So just a couple basic terms and understanding how those things all work. So your CPM is kind of your primary means that most contractors go with, because it kind of lays out what your critical path is, so that if anything on that path slips, your whole project will slip. If anything comes back, if anything's on your critical path that you make up time for, then your critical path will probably change items. So I'll let you go through all of this. I just want to let you know that there's some just scheduling basics, scheduling logic basics, interpretation stuff, and understanding how predecessors and successors work. So again, I don't have to go through all this stuff, but just some basic terminology and understanding the logic behind scheduling. You can get out of that. The other one is scheduling basics. Now, after you read through the network scheduling information, this PowerPoint here will kind of walk you through just the basics of understanding how to lay out your schedule. So everyone does it a little bit differently. This is something that I put together personally, and this is the way that I would go about putting together a schedule. People ask sometimes, do you start at the end and work your way back, or you start yourself at the front and work your way through the project? And the right answer to that is, I guess, somewhat preference. When I was a GC, when I worked for a GC on projects, in general contracting projects, I oftentimes would work from the back to the front, because we are given a hard deadline and we have to figure out how to make things work within that deadline. If I was a CM at risk or in a design build project, a lot of times I would start my first schedule from start to finish to see what kind of reasonably made sense, and then start backing things up and figuring it out. So it's really, I think it's more preferential. You can do it multiple different ways. Again, this is just the way I would kind of lay out schedule in my own sequence of events. So, going through how basic considerations of starting a schedule, right? One of the big things is understanding your contractual requirements, all these different milestones that are taking place, and things that you need to hit. So a lot of times, I don't even like to look at the entire schedule. I like to figure out milestones first, because that kind of helps you conceptualize smaller portions, smaller chunks of the project. How do I get to this point? How do I get from that point to point A to point B, B to C, and then kind of break it down from there. Right? New construction versus renovation. That's a big deal too, because if you're dealing with new construction, you have a whole different set of issues to deal with than if you're in renovation. And if you're in renovation, are you in occupied versus unoccupied? Because then we might have to phase things or do different fire protection measures or safety measures. So there's a lot of considerations depending on the type of project you're dealing with. Location, time of year, right? Any kind of specialty items, size of the project, the scope of the project, right? So if I'm for instance, I've worked on a lot of stadiums. One stadium we had to clear 42 acres. So there was a ton of earthwork, and we had actually to break it up into two separate projects. We had just the grading project, and that in itself was a huge undertaking because of all the complexities. And then you have the building project, and then you had the fields projects, and then you had different things to deal with. So all those considerations change how you actually lay out your schedule and what you have to consider for the schedule. I kind of mentioned all this stuff, so I'm going to kind of whip through it. Again, talking about milestones, these are your big markers. What is going to hold me up? What are some of those big times of a project that I need to hit? A lot of obviously, start and completion dates are obviously huge milestones. When are we actually starting this thing, and when are we finishing it, right? Key delivery items is kind of a big one too. So we're talking long lead items, some of our big mechanical units, maybe steel delivery, stuff like that. That's really going to shape our project. I always, and a lot of people would probably put this on there too, your building enclosure date's a huge one, because that indicates we can now start working on the inside and the outside, and we can bring a whole lot of other trades in. and start resequencing this whole thing. Utility outages are a big one too. So if we're transferring power, right? So I mean, those are huge coordination things to worry about. Important meetings and walkthroughs and inspections should be on there too. A lot of times those are maybe later on, or working on like rough-ins and things like that to get me from one area to the next. And then different owner approval dates. Task sequencing is just understanding like individual items, in a step-by-step process. You're basically creating a list. And if you've never been in Microsoft Project or any other scheduling software, it's pretty much like Excel. You create a list and you go, in order of what things have to take place sequentially to get to the next thing. And then you can start manipulating from there. So just a couple basic sequencing examples are thrown in here for, this one's just showing like metal stud and gyp wall assemblies and maybe a mechanical rooftop unit. Right now just showing how to set them up in sequence. Once we get to predecessors and successors, then, it's pretty important to understand that some things have to take place before other things have to take place, or some things have to start simultaneously, but they're two different tasks. Or you can start one, maybe not simultaneously, but give yourself a lag period where you start one, the other one's dependent on that one item starting, but you give it a day or two to get it out of your way, right? So you're always constantly thinking of sequence, but you're also thinking of time when it comes to schedule too. So that's just what your predecessors and successors are. When you start creating those links, that's how your schedule actually starts getting built, right? So your links are really important when you start understanding like what has to take place first, right? So your finish to start is your typical, right? One item finishes, the next one starts on that, and that's your default for pretty much any software. Start to start is another one that I use quite commonly because, again, you have this lag period where, I don't want a 10-day task to take place and then the next task after that follows. I might take that 10-day task, and after 2 days, I want the next thing to follow, right? But I need that first company to get out of my way. So maybe it's like drywall hanging versus drywall finishing. I'm not going to wait until they're completely done finishing, or hanging, sorry, before I start my next crew on finishing. So that's where I use a lot of start to start plus lag period. So you see here, going back to this wall layout, we're starting to link predecessors. So rough framing here is task item number 1. So my predecessor for MEP rough-in would be number 1. I need that wall roughed in or rough framed before I can rough it in with my MEPs, and so on and so forth. Once you start doing that, then your Gantt chart starts building itself out. All right, I can mention what lag is too. So I'm going to kind of, lag is just an X amount of time that you prescribe within your schedule that allows that other task to kind of start, and then you can follow up behind it. So, and just an example here, and I mentioned this before, but you hang drywall and you finish drywall, right? I don't want to wait the full period of hanging drywall before my finishing starts. So after I'm done doing my sequencing and after I'm done starting to link my predecessors and successors, then I start getting into durations, right? Durations is just how long it takes for those tasks to take place. So now that I've, I got my sequence here, I got my predecessors, now I'm going to start putting individual days into my calendar, and that's going to start automatically changing when my start and finish is based on the logic and sequence. So, and then the Gantt chart starts filling itself out for you, and that's where your critical path and everything start coming into play. Other considerations, you have resources, and on Microsoft Project, a resource is a trade or the company that's performing that specific activity. So you can add resources back in, right? So you individually plug names in. I just use the actual trade. So now that I have my resources plugged in, after I start continuing on putting in resources, it was pretty apparent here that I can't just have MEP rough-in. I should probably break those out in electrical and plumbing rough-in, just in general, because now I have people associated with it. I can also start adding dollar values and stuff to it too, so you can start figuring out cash flow, and that's not for this class. We'll worry about that stuff later. But just because you sequenced it one way the first time doesn't mean that you can't go back, add other things, rearrange some things, change your predecessors. All that kind of stuff happens throughout the duration of a project. And it's really important, obviously, to keep up on that throughout the entire project. So after you complete your schedule, right? It's also really important that you start linking that back to your pre-construction schedule, which is a different process. We're not going to worry about that in this class either, but there are some really important dates there. There's contract awards, there's submittals, there's lead times. There are things that really affect how your project schedule is actually going to work. So you really need to consider those things as well. So once you're done working on, your main construction schedule, you're going to have to rethink some things, relink to a pre-construction schedule, add whole different sections and stuff like that. Um, and then after you link that, you're going to notice that maybe we aren't going to get to some things because my submittal process isn't going to be done. So really important to understand all those different processes. And I just want to add here too a couple examples of some really commonly difficult things to schedule. One is doors and hardware, just because I've had up to 13 subcontractors work on one individual door. So scheduling individual sequences and tasks for doors gets complicated, especially in hardware and how, different egress, different types of hardware sets that you have get really challenging. Your RTUs, your parapets, there's an awful lot of companies that are going to be working on them. You have anything that's penetrating your roof is going to be challenging. Parapets, you might have 6, 7, 8 subcontractors depending on what all the materials are that you're dealing with. Curtain walls are complicated just because they're a major structural component. They're a self-structural component, but they have to rely on a bunch of other things too. The measurements are extremely challenging. It takes a long time to get that curtain wall after measurements. Specialty items are also very complicated too. Like I always bring up food service equipment. Stuff like that gets challenging just because the specs on those change a lot. Trying to get them in a timely fashion is difficult. So there's a lot of different things. I just want to give you a couple ideas. Okay, moving on here. So there is a scheduling glossary. There's a couple other basic videos here to understand. These are actually older videos from when we actually had to move from our current in-person delivery to online. So Jim and Heidi were teaching the class at that point, and they're still good introductory videos. They just the introduction to those videos are meant for someone else, so don't worry about that so much. Just the important information is still in there, and they're pretty short videos too, just to understand those different terms and resource leveling within Microsoft Project. You also have some important resources here from Microsoft Project as well. So if you're struggling with anything, there are some resources to take a look at. The practice activities here are good for you to go through. There's nothing due with them, but this one kind of ties back to that network scheduling. You can do some diagram logic practicing if you'd like. It just kind of gives you a layout of what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to kind of create some of these logic diagrams, and you have practice activities throughout that you can do on your own, just to understand how the scheduling sequence works. A little tool here for scheduling terms, and then there's also a garage schedule activity. So these different activities you can do on your own to help get yourself acclimated with the Microsoft Project tools. Try your best on those, and that would help lead you into the actual assignment as well. Where we go here. And just like the other videos, this one again was a little bit of an older video, but it still has all the same information. So definitely worth taking a look at to help with your garage scheduling if you're going to do that practice. Then for your assignment, so again, you're going to pull out the Dome Football Center schedule or Dome Football Center plans, and you're going to go through this assignment. Let's see, there it is. And this is just going to lay out what your requirements are, right? So giving you names of different contractors, these are the different headings that you need to create or have within your schedule, and then it's just going to kind of lay out all the different requirements. So you're going to have a minimum 100 tasks, 5 summary tasks. This is pretty easy. All you have to do with a summary task is you have to just on the activity item below something, you just indent that over, and that first one becomes a summary task. So a lot of times if you want to do, like, say for instance we have like site work can be a summary task. It's not going to be the case for this project, but maybe site work is a summary task. Maybe my first item is clear and grub. Well, all I have to do on that item of clear and grub is move it to the right, just tab it over. There's a little tab button just like you have on Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel, and that'll push it over, and it creates that site work activity then as a summary task. You have to create milestones. Those are just 0-day items on your schedule. And yeah, by looking at the plans and specs, mostly just the plans on this one, in some of the parameters, trying to create your own schedule from scratch. And then you have a module discussion as well. Make sure you do this after your assignment is done, just because some of the questions here are, actually most of the questions are based on your actual assignment. And then a quiz to wrap things up. Sorry about the jumping around here, but your quiz is mostly based on the scheduling terms. So yeah, I think that's it for this one. I know it's a little bit longer than I expected, but I wanted to run you through a little bit of that one PowerPoint anyways, just so you can try to get an idea of some important considerations when you're starting to build your own schedule from scratch. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.